If you're someone like me who used to face a very nagging shoulder injury every time I was bench pressing, where the front of my delt gave this very pinching sensation, which later on also inhibited me to perform basic overhead movements, and while visiting multiple physios, doing countless of basic rehab drills, none of them actually worked. Then you come to the right place, because this was my trajectory as well in my early 20s. But it was only when I aligned and started to dig deeper into the physiology and the actual mechanism of our shoulder that I found that two fundamental capacities were vital to improve my shoulders, heal them, but also simultaneously help them grow exponentially in strength and size. So in this video, I'm going to show you why those two fundamental capacities are extremely important for the shoulder and for the rest of the body, and also how to use them by looking into the core movement patterns to fix your shoulders while also have them grow in strength and size. Now, first of all, if you're new to the channel, who am I? I'm Tim, and I help men who are fed up with having physical issues they've developed by more traditional forms of fitness and health, so they can build an athletic, lean, and pain-free body in less than 1.5 hours a week. And we do that by using extremely precise signaling over those two physical capacities that we're going to address, that are fundamental to how we move and all of the different joints and mechanisms from a physical exertion perspective. And of course, we do that by accompanying it with the necessary and important building blocks for recovery and healing to occur, so that once you've built that athletic and pain-free body, you can also enjoy it for the decades to come. Now, before we talk about fixing anything, we want to understand what the shoulder is designed to do. So I'm going to step inside of the why and the how here first, before showing the actual movement patterns that help you fix your shoulders and grow them. If you want to go there immediately, you can skip ahead, but if you want to know the deeper layers and mechanism of our shoulders, you can continue watching. Now, the why relates to the shoulder's primary job, and that is to create a level of force that is suitable for the task that we want to execute with the arm, the movement task that we want to execute with the arm. And these can be divided into two predominant categories, which are either manipulatory tasks, so think of grabbing, holding, drawing, shaking, pulling, pushing, and with shaking I mean grabbing somebody's hand and then confirming a shake, or a transmissive quality of the shoulder and arm, which is throwing, punching, shaking, swinging. And the difference between the two is that with the manipulatory tasks, you can produce, or you're producing, a level of force with the shoulder and utilize it with the arm, in which you can still have a lot of freedom in altering the course of the movement trajectory or the configuration of the arm itself, right? So if I were to open a door, once I bring my arm towards the door, I can like twist and turn the shoulder into many different ranges of motion. Same goes for the elbow in alignment with the range of motion of the shoulder, etc., etc. So I can still be very freely into how I alter the configuration in relation to the task that I have for it. However, with the transmissive tasks for the shoulder and arm, the shoulder has to produce a level of force and a sort of a widened directionality, which can then be utilized, and it lets the arm transmit that force in relation to that task, in which the correction of the configuration is much harder once it's released, right? So once you throw a ball, once you have sort of stored the force and then released it, it's much harder to alter the course or the configuration of the arm. Now, these are very good to understand, or very important to understand, because it tells us that the primary role of the shoulder is to produce that force in relation to what we want to do with it. And most symptoms of men's shoulders that I work with is because they have a lack of capacity in meeting certain demands that the shoulder cannot, or the entire shoulder architecture cannot face yet. And what then tends to happen is that the brain and the nervous system is always monitoring certain ranges of motion of where our joints are in relation to space. And once it doesn't feel safe, it keeps sending very potent signals to inhibit or down-regulate the amount of activity we want to pursue in certain ranges of motion. So once you are in pain, it's simply because the brain and the nervous system doesn't feel safe, and we haven't developed the amount of strength of capacity to meet certain demands, especially in potentially producing that force for the task that we have for the arm to execute. So these two elements are very important, especially because what men don't realize in increasing or this formula of capacity versus the demand or stressor that comes in is that the shoulder doesn't produce that force suitable for the task alone. And it needs to be very accurate, and to be very accurate, to help the arm be very accurate, it needs a lot of optionality. Let's zoom in on the first one, in which the shoulder never works in isolation. If you think about walking demonstrates a lot of evolutionary developments we have had as a species, but also in the entire animal kingdom, especially across how we are utilizing energy to be maximally efficient once we are transitioning through space, which in walking sense, as an example, means that we've got a palette of synergies, meaning that there are a lot of combinations that the brain and the nervous system has saved, in which it utilizes many areas, many tissues of the body all in one go to be that efficient with the energy that comes in. So when you walk, there's something going on there as well, in which the shoulder works together with the spine and the hip. So for example, when you walk, you always see a contralateral pattern emerge, for example, right shoulder to left hip or left shoulder to right hip, but additionally we tend to spinal bend a little bit so that the left shoulder gets pulled back and the left hip gets pulled forwards. So this synergy across the proximal areas of the body, so think of the spine and also the hips, is very important to understand, because if we are or want to produce that level of force, we also need to respect the fact that, okay, if we want to utilize the shoulder most, maybe we should also incorporate the spine and the hips, because we have tend to evolve and use these different districts and its tissues to create an amount of locomotion related to the task. So the force that we produce from the shoulder never works in isolation. Now the second one is something I think the fitness industry tends to focus more on, which is that in order for us to produce a level of force with the shoulder and to execute a task with the arm, it needs to be accurate. So our shoulder is one of the most mobile joints in the entire animal kingdom. And what's even more special about the shoulder is that it's even more mobile, for example, than the hip, because the shoulder joint is more shallow compared to the hip hip socket, which is more deeper. Right, so instead of the hip having more of this of the acetabulum with the femur, it's more of this deeper socket. The shoulder has a more shallow socket in which the humerus attaches to the glenoid fossa and also the other joints, of course. But this is the main area where it sort of attaches to each other. But we need to respect this, because the amount of mobility that the shoulder has, due to the task that we potentially have for it, means that there's also a greater need for stability, which is why we have such an amount of different tissues surrounding the shoulders, where the predominant and sort of larger muscles or tissues are the lats, pecs, delts, and they have a role in producing more forwards and backwards movements. So we tend to dominate, or the shoulder tends to dominate with shoulder and shoulder flexion and shoulder extension in the sagittal plane. However, the shoulder never works alone in these movement trajectories. It always works together with the tissues to keep it stable, and the other tissues also actively or help contribute in other planes of motion. So the stabilizing muscles or tissues, the supraspinatus, the infraspinatus, teres, minor, the traps, rhomboid, etc., serratus anterior, all of those tissues, they help when we are moving the shoulder in these different ranges of motion whereas the most dominant range of motion or the plane of motion is the sagittal plane. So what we want to do is we want to respect the shoulder's capacity to not work in isolation, and we want to respect the shoulder's capacity to be stabilized when it is moving to produce a level of force. And the solution there is that we want to build as much relative strength predominantly in the sagittal plane of motion because we are already utilizing parts of the other range of motion as well where the stabilizing muscles or tissues assist in. And we want to go over a full range of motion so that we have a lot of skeletal force coming or is being produced from our muscles, but we also want to make sure that our force managers, which is more the connective tissue, and they manage the forces that are produced in relation to how we relate to gravity, is being utilized. And then finally, we want to stimulate as much synergistic elements or synergistic workings of those tissues, not only around the shoulder and the regions that are attached to the shoulder, but potentially even more, so that the brain and the nervous system has more options which it can choose from in order to choose the right force path, as you will, for the task that we have for it. Here is how we're going to do this. We're going to focus, in this case primarily, or we're going to zoom in primarily on 4 movement directions of the shoulder in the sagittal plane of motion, trying to respect that the shoulder predominantly moves into the sagittal plane of motion, but also trying to promote as much of the synergies and planes of motion as we can. And we're going to do that by doing a horizontal push and pull, because what these 4 movement elements do is that they respect the sagittal plane, but we break it down into 4 elements that can utilize or are utilizing our own body weight as the parameter or the difficulty in order to grow the shoulder in its tissue, so that we are creating a strength over that full range. But we're also leveraging this potential of creating more synergies across the structure, which I already mentioned. So the first one is a planche push-up variant. So what you're going to see here is you're going to see me perform one of the more higher up levels of a planche push-up. But the idea here is very simple. With the planche push-up, you can basically scale it or decrease it in its difficulty towards a normal push-up based on how much horizontal distance you're creating with the hands as opposed to the shoulders. Meaning, with a push-up, the more forward you're leaning, so the more you bring your hands towards your hips, the more stress you are placing on the shoulder. And if you look at the calisthenics procedure or gymnastic procedures, you see people eventually lifting the legs to create an even higher demand on the shoulders. But once you are lifting the legs, what you immediately need to do, or what you're basically doing, is you're creating more tension across the entire structure around different tissues. And that is something the brain and the nervous system needs to computate as well. So not only are we increasing the demand on the shoulder, where we are improving it on its full range of motion, because we are working here predominantly from partial flexion or partial extension, partial flexion towards full extension, right? So I'm bringing my hands to my waist. As you can see, my elbows are far beyond my rib cage, which means that I'm working a full range of motion, and I'm trying to utilize as many areas of the body and going upwards. So this is the first pattern in which we're strengthening the shoulder in one of the ranges that we want to build strength in and also condition the connective tissue. Now the second one is the front lever or the front lever row. And this is a pattern in which we are basically working from shoulder or partial shoulder flexion towards full extension, but in a pulling motion, right? So now we are working more the posterior chain, whereas with the horizontal push, we work the front side of the deltoid, we work the pecs, predominantly. And of course, we have a lot of core involvement as well. Now here with the front lever or front lever row, what we're doing is we're pulling ourselves up, still trying to retain as much horizontal distance as we can, meaning we're pulling as a cue more towards the hips. And here we're activating more the rhomboids, we're activating a little bit more the lats, the rear delts. And what you can also imagine, or what we're doing here as well, is that because we are going into more retraction, we're also stimulating the scapula and its assisting muscles to help with this pulling motion. Now, again, you can start with a row here, but we are increasing the difficulty by moving more and more away from the hands, so creating more distance of the hands and the shoulders, until we can lift off the legs and create a higher force distribution across the entire structure. And again, this will put progressively the shoulder under more load while respecting a full range of the sagittal plane and incorporating many more tissues. So this is the second part of this entire roadmap. Now the opposite direction, or the second equation, not opposite direction, but the second equation of this formula is that you are or want to work from partial flexion to full flexion. So full flexion is when you bring your arm overhead, and what you're doing here is you're moving from a partial range towards full flexion, also both in a push and a pull, in which the pushing element is a handstand push-up, which you can do with either a wall or you can do it with the straps of a band. But what you're here doing is you're creating as much verticality, meaning the more vertical the position of the body is, the harder it becomes. And you're trying to make sure that you want to do that as much as you can. So for the people that I work with, we tend to start with the legs down, because if you bring the legs down, we're less vertical, right? We have less weight on top of the shoulders. Now, you can gradually increase this by bringing more and more weights on the shoulders, hence the verticality. And what we're then doing is we're creating that strength in this overhead position. So this is also an amazing tool to improve your shoulders capacity, because again, we're respecting one of the ranges of motion with a bodyweight exercise that is progressively overloaded by more verticality of how you position it. And what you also see with a handstand push-up is that you can also orientate the shoulder, and the orientation of the shoulder also determines how much of the other tissues you're involving. So for example, what you can see me here doing is I have the hands in a neutral position, and I try to keep the elbows, which is not mandatory, but I try to keep it as close to the rib cage as I can. And that forces already a bit more external orientation of the shoulders and the extremity, and that it activates in the pushing motion also more the serratus anterior. So we're involving all of these different tissues that have also a stabilizing effect, but also are utilizing the shoulder's ability to move a little bit through certain range of motion with a more dominant focus on the sagittal plane. And working already what I mentioned, the full range of motion for skeletal muscle and connective tissue. Now the final one, and this is going to be the most, I think the most scary one for most people, but actually it's one of the best I found if you've done it correctly, is the one arm chin up. And this is a very high demanding exercise. I made a video on this you can check out as well, but it's an exercise that actually is very scalable in terms of if you would place your feet on the ground and you have one arm in which you can pull up with. You're pulling up with one arm and you're pulling all the way from full shoulder flexion towards partial shoulder flexion. I am doing this, or I'm attempting this with shoulders off the ground. Now this is of course extremely hard to do, but what I always recommend, you bring the legs in, which acts as a support, and you scale your way up. So for example, you could start with having all of your weight on your legs and then just moving upwards, getting your hand towards the chest and lowering with a support in front of you of a chair. And then as you progress, as you release the amount of weight of the legs, you will find more and more difficulty. But that's how you can progress this element. Now, the cool part of the one arm chin up is that it is a unilateral exercise, meaning that you're pulling only with one arm. And the advantage of this is that it's very hard. It has a lot of progressive stimulus that you can induce over time. But you're also, because you're pulling with one arm, you have to also incorporate more tissues on that working side to facilitate that pulling motion. So you think of the serratus anterior, which I already mentioned with the pushing motion, which gets engaged, but mostly more your external, internal oblique. You get your lower lat involved, your bigger lat involved. So also one side of the hip flexor gets more activated. So you incorporate a lot of sort of rotational or side bending tissues just by focusing on a one arm or a unilateral pattern. So these patterns are the four that comprise your shoulder, working from full extension to full flexion and backwards into four body weight exercises that can be scaled towards higher levels, but also towards very beginner levels, because you're utilizing how you are positioned in relation to space versus the amount of weight that you're dropping on of your structure, which also means that every time you try to progress, you need to involve more muscles, more tissues, which the central nervous system then needs to computate and manage. And that has a ripple effect on how well your structure is actually performing and producing that force that comes from the shoulder. So only doing these progressively will help you get shoulders that fix your pain, but also increase their strength and size, because the stronger you get, the size that you build is a result or a consequence of the stronger you get, right? Because that is how the tissues undergo changes. Is they reach a certain stimulus, they need to grow, they need to get bigger, because or else they cannot face the demand that we're placing on it. So it's actually a very safe way to progressively stimulate your shoulders to improve their capacity. And once we improve their capacity, as we've shown here, you switch from a state of pain towards a state of power, because more capacity means that you can handle more demands. So this is how you can improve your shoulders, how I've improved my shoulders, but also how many other other men that I work with have improved their shoulders. So for example, a recent client who's now working 4 weeks into the program, we started with a pike push-up, which is where most men start with, or a little bit lower. But as you can see, the amount of verticality he already gained, straightening the legs, putting more and more weight on top of his shoulders, has been quite an achievement in such a short time. He's now trying to do full handstands against the wall, at least elements of them, which is one of the key reasons for growth, is that you want to try to stimulate your max every inch of the pattern. Another client who came to me last year, and in just in 3 months he managed to unlock serious feats with his physical performance, coming from a more traditional fitness background, or a 67-year-old powerlifter who I've also had incorporating some other exercise on top of what you saw me doing here, but basically he's also working a full range of motion, and you can see how much extra shoulder extension he's gained by simply training a full range, stimulating his max, and incorporating more body weight orientated exercises to maximize on these results. Or another client who came in who had also similar nagging sensations as I had in my early 20s, and we also focus on just a couple of movement patterns, very scalable, and over time he not only saw an increase in his range of motion, but he was also able to pull up or do pull-ups and dips pain-free, which he couldn't do in the last three and a half years, I believe, which was amazing. Or another client who after 4 weeks also unlocked a tuck planche push-up just by simply working his shoulder at his max capacity in a very short time frame per week. Now, if you want to achieve similar results as these men, there are two options. You can either check the link below, in which I have a protocol, a timely protocol in which you can build on these patterns, and there are 3 extra patterns included. And they will help you build shoulders that are not only pain-free but very strong and capable as well. Or you can join the program, which is underneath that link. So yeah, hope this video hope this video helped. And if you want to see how a protocol or shoulder protocol could look like for you, check one of the links below, and then I'll see you in the next one.